there is a difference between being able to speak and understand Spanish in a one-on-one context and being able to do the same thing in a group context, because that does require a higher level of being able to interpret the different nuances of how people express themselves in real time, which is a skill which you can develop. However, if you've found yourself maybe speaking in a group setting and you realize, wow, this is actually a little bit more difficult than when I have a one-on-one conversation with my friend, the same thing happened to me. And in this video, I want to explain to you what I did to help myself overcome those challenges. If you don't know who I am, my name's Jonathan. I started learning Spanish through immersion in February 2021, and I reached conversational fluency within 8 months. I've done a few interviews explaining the process that I went through. And this is the interview I did with Pablo from Dreaming Spanish. And this is also the interview I did with Mike Ben. Big shout out to those guys who are very instrumental to my progress. But the interesting thing is, when I started learning Spanish in February, I set myself the goal that, you know what, I want to be fluent by November because I want to do a trip to Spain and just speak to people in Spanish. So I ended up doing so, and I documented it on my Instagram. It's still there if you want to have a look at it. So I went to Madrid, and then I also went to Barcelona. But the funny thing is, when I was in Madrid, and I can even show you guys the exact day, this is when I had my first encounter with speaking with a group in Spanish, right? Because I'd done speaking with friends on the phone, I'd done like different online conversations in Spanish. I'd even spoken to people one-on-one in Spanish in person. But then there was the day when I actually went to church and I met some people, and then we went for like a dinner after, or like lunch. And I realized that, wow, this is different. Like, this is very different, to the extent that I remember having to process the conversations, and literally, here it was. Like, literally, without exaggerating, I was getting a headache. Right? I actually had a headache after, because my brain was on overdrive. It was doing something I'd never done before, just being able to process that many people speaking in Spanish, who also, by the way, a lot of them were Latinos. And I'd spent a lot of time consuming content which was Spanish from Spain. And so there is obviously the slight difference. And my brain was really going into overdrive. And that was the first time I realized that, okay, there is actually a difference between doing this and having a one-on-one conversation. And this skill is something that I need to practice. So that's the first thing to understand. Understand that it is normal that there might be a difference in your level or your ability to have a one-on-one conversation and your ability to flow in a group setting without getting lost and be like, "Bro, what are these guys talking about? What are they saying?" Especially because when natives speak between themselves, they will do so in a way that will expose some of the slang that maybe you haven't been exposed to, or some of the ways that they express themselves. They shorten some words, they eat up certain syllables, they don't pronounce some things, they might use different words that mean the same thing. And all of this adding to different accents, different speeds of talking, all of this put together in a big pot will cause challenges. And the only reason why I say this is not to kind of bring you down, is actually to give yourself the understanding that that is normal. And if you haven't yet had a group exposure to Spanish, expect these things, because it's going to put you in a position whereby once it does happen, you can actually learn from the situation rather than experience like a confidence hit, which happens to a lot of people. Now, the second thing I want you guys to understand, and the second thing that I did and I had to learn how to do, was how to ask, or how to use the situation to my benefit. What do I mean? When I was learning Spanish or immersing myself in Spanish on my own, I'd often do this thing which is recommended, which is where you kind of just grab the general context of what's being said and you kind of forget about the details. So let's say, as long as let's say you're watching a movie and you're following the movie and you're able to follow what's going on in the movie to a high extent. Maybe there are a few words here and there that you don't quite understand, but it's okay. Like, I'm following the movie overall. That's okay. Right? Now, that will work when you're doing input, and that will work when you're watching videos. That will work when you're listening to a podcast. That might even work when you're speaking to a friend in a one-on-one situation where you're controlling the conversation and you can still use the context of your specific conversation and your, for example, last answer to kind of work out what they're saying. But that all falls apart when you speak in a group of people. Okay. And the challenge is, if you've built up the habit, which I had done, and to be honest, it's something that I'm still working on. When you get so used to being like, okay, no worries, I don't understand everything, but I'm just going to flow with the context. When you get really used to that, what can happen is you then, in a group setting, you don't mention the fact that you don't necessarily understand everything that's going on. And although that can save you when it comes to an input setting on your own, when you're in a group setting, these are actually the times where you kind of want to stop and be like, sorry, like, what did you just say? Can you explain that again? Now, of course, depending on who you're speaking with, how much, how would I say this in English? I was going to say confianza that you have with the people, which is the Spanish way. I don't even know how to say that. How comfortable you are with them, I guess, or how much of a close relationship you have with the person. Um, you might be able to do this more often or not, and you can kind of judge that just based on your own awareness. But if possible, in these group settings, and the first thing that I had to kind of force myself to start doing was to just ask, like, sorry, what did you say? Like, repeat that. Um, what does that mean? ¿Qué significa eso? Okay. And the reason why you do that is because what you're doing is you're learning how different people actually express themselves in a way that might be adjacent, similar, but adjacent to what you've learned. Okay, now if you don't do that, what will happen is you're just going to have this one directional or one dimensional Spanish, which is okay. But what happens is when you get into the real world, Spanish isn't one dimensional. And so it's actually being in these situations and making the most of them and understanding that, you know what? This isn't a concept that I haven't been exposed to. It's rather a concept that I haven't been exposed to in this way. And one thing that actually helped me to understand this, and this might seem a little bit silly, is I was listening to some content in Twi, which by the way is the third language that I'm learning. And my dad actually speaks Twi. So I was listening to some content, and it was for natives because there isn't that much comprehensible input type style content in Twi. But anyway, that's for another day. But the point is, my dad from time to time would translate some of the things that they were saying to English, just for fun, or kind of just to explain to me what they were saying. And I came to this realization, which you might have already come to, and it will sound so obvious when I say it, but I'm going to tie it back to the group setting in a second. And I realized that, you know what? Everything he was translating was simple English concepts, in the sense that I realized, okay, if they had said this in English, I would have understood. Now, obviously, that's obvious, but I want you to really think about what I'm saying. Like, the concepts that they're referring to aren't these strange concepts. Like, what they're saying would make sense. It's not like an advanced idea. It's a very simple idea. The only problem is the way they expressed it, I didn't get. Now, we can actually do the same thing in Spanish. Like, when you're hearing people speak in Spanish, there's times where it's not the concept or the thing itself that you don't understand. It's just the way they express themselves. And if they were to express themselves in the way that you're familiar with, you would understand this. So how does this tie back to a group settings? A lot of the times when you're speaking in a group, and I realize this, like, it's not that they're speaking about something that you just have no clue about. It's just that there's a slight divergence in the way that they're explaining it and the way that you're used to hearing that same concept. And if you can pause, get them to explain it and be like, oh, interesting. Or even just the way they pronounce a word that you already know, and be like, okay, interesting. That's actually how you guys say it when you're speaking in between natives. Then what you can do is you can then become more multidimensional in your understanding of that concept. And the more you do that, the more you're going to find it's easy to speak in groups because you become more of a well-rounded Spanish speaker and Spanish kind of in your comprehension of Spanish. Now, the way you can do this, and this is my third point, the way you can actually get to the point where your skill is improving, because this is a skill, like with all skills, the more you do it, the better you get. The more you get good reps, the better you get, the stronger you get, the faster you get. So what you want to start doing if you're at this level, and I imagine if you're watching this type of video and you've had this type of struggle, you're probably somewhat at like an intermediate level, more of an intermediate, almost advanced level, okay? What you can do is seek more opportunities to expose yourself to group conversations. Now, I mentioned that in my case, and this is an excellent way to do this. In my case, I actually went to church. And that was the first type of group setting exposure that I had. Following that, now my partner's from Spain, so I get a lot of group exposure when I'm just with her family, just naturally. But let's say your partner's not Spanish, or your partner isn't a Spanish speaker, and maybe you don't actually go to church, you don't have like a religious organization. That's understandable. What you can do is look for, like, if there are any clubs, if you are able to go to a language that speaks Spanish, and if there's any clubs or interest groups that you can get involved in, or even in your same country, finding pockets of like communities, events that Spanish speakers go to. And if you can expose yourself to the group Spanish setting what that will help you to do is you'll start to build in the same way that we do input in, like, we watch maybe movies, then we watch series, then maybe we watch like the news, and it kind of gives us another form of input that we're receiving and we're learning. It's the same thing in these group conversations. We need more input. We need more exposure. And then if we have the confidence, and this is where the ability to step outside of your comfort zone, to even just admit, right, I actually didn't understand that. Can you say that again? How do you mean? And once they say it, you say, oh, okay, interesting. And you make those links, that is when your Spanish is actually going to jump to the next level, even just for general Spanish, because you're going to understand the different way that people express themselves, different way that people speak faster, slower, not pronouncing things well when they just like muddle up all of the syllables and you can't really hear it, but you can kind of understand, oh, wow, okay, he says it like this. You want to expose yourself to that. Now, if you can't do that in person, when I say can't, I say that loosely. If I mean, what I want to say is if at the moment it's not ideal for you to do that in person, you can still achieve this online, but it's not as good. If you can do like if you have like any online friends and you're doing like online group calls, I know there's some of these language learning apps have like different meeting rooms, wherever it is. I think I used to use Tandem and sometimes they used to do like group conversations. That can help. The other thing you can do is try and watch content. If you're consuming a lot of content, try to cater or kind of steer yourself towards content where natives are speaking in conversational, in a conversational format. So for example, you'll find that, okay, maybe you've watched movies and you're like, yeah, these are native speaking, and that is true, but it's not really as conversational and as raw as the conversations that you're going to be having in groups whenever you go to like Spain or Mexico, wherever it is, and you speak with friends. And so if you can find, like, a lot of it will be on YouTube. I always recommend listening to the streamers because those are the guys that they speak a lot. They have a lot of content speaking in normal Spanish, like their normal day-to-day Spanish. And a lot of the times when they do events in groups, the way they communicate with each other is very conversational. You'll pick up a lot of new Spanish that you wouldn't have learned through like movies or anything similar like that. So I'd recommend trying to now find more examples or finding more, let's say, opportunities to immerse yourself in that specific way and that specific group setting. And what you'll find is that over time, as it is a skill, it will develop. You will start to pick up some of the nuances. And obviously, you will always be learning. Even me, like sometimes I go into certain group settings and I don't fully understand everything. But what I try to do when I am in these group settings is even if somebody isn't talking to me, I still try to process what they're saying. Right. And even for me myself, like it's easy for me to just switch off and be like, yeah, they're not speaking to me, that's fine. But if I can just process and start to listen and say, okay, what do they say? Does that make sense to me? Ask questions. Sorry, what did you just say? Those are the things that bit by bit will add the 1%, add the 1%, add the 1% for you to get to the point where you're not struggling as much in a group setting and you're kind of where you are in like a one-on-one setting as well. Now, if you would like my personal help to help you to do this, and not just this, but to help you to, let's say, reorganize or really optimize the immersion that you're doing in Spanish and your overall Spanish learning journey, I have a link in the description that will take you to a private group of people that are learning Spanish and would like to break through whatever plateau they feel like they're at. Click the link. More than happy to speak to you and have a conversation. And I'll see you in the next video.